Alright everyone, the nation of Turkey is now deciding whether it wants to continue to be a westernized nation with, a representative government, or whether they just want to say, screw it, it's not working, Erdogan can be our new dictator for life, which is what he will become if the referendum succeeds. It's hard to predict what's going to happen because apparently the polling there is totally out of whack to the point of total laughability. It's not like here where you've got sampling bias and cherry picking and stuff. No, it's more like it's some polls are going to be openly hostile to one side or the other, to the point at which one poll is saying, oh, Erdogan's going to have his referendum with like 80% of the vote, and another one says, oh, only 5% of the population supports it. That sort of thing that you have in a very, very troubled democracy, so-called. In the past, I looked at Turkey and I said, well, when people talk about, oh, Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, they're wrong because Turkey exists. But since sort of the protests over, I think it was Ghazi Park over there, since that period of time, Erdogan has gone from a slightly authoritarian executive figure to one that is increasingly looking like a dictatorial madman. And since that period of time, he's pulled out all stops to absorb more and more power. Now, I would not be pleased if the referendum passes, but I think there's at least a slightly higher chance that it will, due to rigging, due to corruption within the voting system. His party, his people that are all in these positions of power can easily swing the vote by a little bit in some of the metro areas or whatever. That's all he needs to do. He gets his referendum. All of a sudden, he can now hire and fire any sort of bureaucrat he wants at any time. He can do the same with all sorts of other positions, appoint multiple vice presidents, gets rid of, I think, the prime minister's slot, essentially defangs their legislative body, which makes him a dictator. It makes him the undisputed ruler, the Sultan-style ruler of Turkey. That's what Erdogan will become if it passes. I believe voting is already closed and now the results are being counted. I could be wrong on that. So, unfortunately, I think there's a fairly good chance it passes, which means Turkey is no longer a European-style nation. It's now a power of the Middle East, strictly speaking. There will be no trapping of liberal democracy there. It won't exist. Erdogan will probably proceed to purge some of his foes. He's already said he's going to bring back the death penalty, which I don't even support the use of here, by the way, which means they're not going to be able to join the EU. The problem is Erdogan is going to hold all those refugees over like Merkel and Hollande's and other people's heads if he passes that, which he says he'll do almost immediately. And they say, well, you can't join the EU now. We've outlawed the death penalty. He's going to say, okay, well, all right, everybody, pack your bags. You're headed over to Berlin and Paris and places like that. That's going to be crazy. He might even get his ass kicked out of NATO if he keeps going the way he's going. He's partnering more and more closely sort of with these other nations, sort of Middle Eastern states as well as Russia. Now, I think it's good that Turkey is sort of able to be an intercessor between the Russians and those of us in sort of the web of NATO. I think that's a good thing. When you control the Bosphorus, it's kind of important to be able to have a good diplomatic position with these countries. Otherwise, it leads to war. That's fine. But they're going more and more towards that Russian side after spending decades as a very strident Western sort of ally and figure within this alliance fairly early on, even hosting U.S. weapons systems during the days of the Soviet Union. And that's being sort of pissed away. You can see their currency has had problems over the last half-decade. The economy, growth has had problems as well. There have been almost continual protests and riots there on a yearly basis. There have been terrorist attacks. You've got Turkey's direct involvement in parts of northern Syria. The area is almost falling apart. Then you have these, again, millions of refugees there as well that Erdogan might use as political pressure. Oh, well, we demand that the EU rescind their rule against capital punishment because we want in the EU and we have capital punishment. We also have 2-3 million people here. We're going to send them across the border. We're not going to take care of them anymore. Or maybe Erdogan will just test out the death penalty and summarily execute them all. It's not like anyone would have any legal sway to stand in his way if he did. They wouldn't be able to stop him. He'll be a dictator if this passes. And even odds are it does. It's hard to tell. It could be that 70% of the population opposes it. It might not even matter. There might be such massive systemic corruption and rigging that nothing stands in its way and it ekes out a win anyway. Oh yeah, Erdogan's referendum won with 99% of the vote. It'd be a little bit like, you know, Saddam Hussein or something like that. I wonder if the U.S. government would frown upon that enough to draw that comparison. You know, Saddam Hussein, they never said anything bad about him as long as he was working with the West. The second that he stopped doing that, he said, oh, well, you know, screw yourselves. I'm independent and sovereign now. All of a sudden, he was an evil dictator who was really politically questionable and, you know, mass graves and all that stuff. They never worried about it while he was working with the West. Just like, you know, the Russians or the Chinese, they'll never condemn some nation as long as they're working with them, even if you've got, like, mountains of skulls. The second that they look to the West, all of a sudden they're the scum of the earth. It's a propaganda tactic. But with Erdogan, it's clear. I'm saying this as an American. You know, Turkey is in NATO. Turkey does work with the Europeans. Turkey is no longer really as Western as it was, even a few years ago. Erdogan is destroying the fabric of their culture. Honestly, I think if this succeeds, they should be kicked out of NATO. We're going to have no choice. Diplomatically speaking, how can NATO save face when we've got a country doing that kind of thing in this military and political alliance? How can we deal with that? It's impossible. So hopefully no wins the day. And then Erdogan next year, like next month, will say, oh, we're going to have a revote. There was some shifty shit in the vote. We're going to hold it over and over again until I get the result that I want. That would be his MO. Little tie-up there. There was one point I remember I saw, this was great. He had like some sort of chest cold or something. And he was giving speeches, and his voice was like little more than a high-pitched mouse squeak, and people were like doing remixes of it on like Turkish-style YouTube and stuff. It was funny as hell. He's sitting there squeaking like a mouse and waving his fist around like a true dictator or something. It wasn't his finest propaganda moment. But yeah, Turkey's got some issues, some difficulties to work through right now. And it's questionable as to whether they'll remain a Western ally for very, very long. Hopefully it's defeated. There could be results in as we speak. Like as I'm making this video, then of course it'd be crappy. But I don't think they'll come in until later. That's about all. Peace out.